is with great privilege and profound responsibility that I rise to present the 2026 budget for the Ministry of Social Development, Education, Youth and Culture, Probation, and Library Services. As we continue to build on the foundation laid by the Premier in her comprehensive budget address, I am reminded that our work is not simply, Madam Speaker, about programs and allocations, but about people, their potential, and their promise. The theme that guides this administration and this budget is more than words. It is a commitment that every child will have access to quality education. Every family will receive the support they need, and every Anguillian will see their culture and heritage celebrated. Madam Speaker, my ministry has been allocated EC 9.11 million in the 2026 budget. This comprises of 74.13 million for recurrent expenditure and 23.98 million for capital expenditure. This allocation represents 18.6% of the recurrent budget, Madam Speaker. This investment reflects government's unwavering commitment to placing people at the center of development. Madam Speaker, I have no doubt that my ministry is one of the toughest, but I also believe it is by far one of the most important because it is so people-centered. Every policy, every decision, every initiative has immediate impact on the lives of our people, Madam Speaker. I wish to begin by thanking the Honorable Premier for her stellar leadership over the last 8 months. It can be characterized as inclusive, visionary, and supportive. I also wish to thank my colleagues for their support, even on days when I may be a bit overbearing. I also wish to thank my colleagues in the Ministry of MSD for their outstanding support during my transition period and beyond. And finally, I wish to once again, Madam Speaker, put on record my sincerest gratitude to the Ministry of Finance and the PS for their continued work during the budget process, but also helping me to fill a number of gaps in my ministry since the transition. Madam Speaker, the last 8 months can be defined by righting wrongs, developing solutions to challenges, and preparing us for the future. Despite all of this, Madam Speaker, I remain hopeful and optimistic about what lies ahead. And I am constantly having to remind myself that Rome was not built in a day. Today's debate, Madam Speaker, will focus on 2 main areas. 1, ministerial achievements and priorities in the various departments. And section 2, entitled Putting Things into Perspective. I wish to start with education, Madam Speaker. Upon taking office, many persons would remember that I maintained that I was very concerned about early childhood education, and particularly the educators in early childhood education. Madam Speaker, not just in Anguilla, but globally, early childhood educators are some of the lowest paid. They have limited employment benefits and limited access to higher education. I am proud to announce that effective January 2026, every preschool teacher registered with the Department of Education will receive an additional $500 EC each month. Additionally, we are adjusting our teacher training policy to offer full scholarships at UE, Open Campus, and other institutions for early childhood educators, up to 10 teachers each year, Madam Speaker. It is our goal to have at least 75% of our early childhood educators with certificates or above before our term ends. And to put things into perspective, less than 20% of our early childhood educators have certificates or above, Madam Speaker. I am committed to supporting them to get to that next level, Madam Speaker. In relation to secondary education, the completion and commissioning of the technical block at the Albina Lake Hodge Comprehensive School represents a defining moment for the technical and vocational training and education in Anguilla. With an allocation of 12 million EC dollars in 2026, this facility will expand the technical and vocational programs, preparing our young people for the modern workforce with skills necessary to thrive. The new sports hub at Campus Q, Madam Speaker, I heard talk earlier about a 200-meter track, and I want to clear it up for the public. This 200-meter track that is being referenced will actually be housed on the Campus Q site, Madam Speaker, and that will be a part of the new sports hub at Campus Q. This is totally separate and apart from the 400-meter track, Madam Speaker. The 400-meter track, Madam Speaker, for the general public still remains on the table, Madam Speaker. So I want the general public to understand that these are two separate initiatives. It is not one or the other, Madam Speaker. We intend to deliver on both. The sports hub at Campus Q, Madam Speaker, is not just about sports. It's also about character development and creating pathways for our youth. We have allocated $0.56 million to support teacher salary adjustments, additional teaching posts, and new curriculum officers at the secondary level. We have never had curriculum officers before, Madam Speaker, completely dedicated to the secondary level. This is something that is critically important as we reform curriculums at the secondary level. A further $0.6 million will be dedicated to teaching and learning materials. Madam Speaker, we believe that good initiatives must be expanded and must be invested on. And in this vein, Madam Speaker, we will continue to support the INSPIRE program that was put in place by the former administration. The INSPIRE program will receive an additional 1.3 million EC dollars, Madam Speaker, so that we can have the laptops at the primary level for both teachers and students replaced and upgraded. This ensures equal access to quality early learning that prepares our children for the digital age. With the rollout of the education management system, Madam Speaker, and the launch of the e-learning platform, we are reimagining how our children learn, connect, and grow. Madam Speaker, another key area of passion for me is higher education. In keeping with our commitment to higher education, Executive Council approved a significant increase in financial support to students living abroad on government scholarships. We didn't wait until 2026, Madam Speaker. Rates had not changed since 2008, over 17 years ago, Madam Speaker. Now, as a result of that change, students will receive up to a 40% increase in some instances. Further to our commitment, Madam Speaker, for higher education, we have earmarked a historic budget of $6 million+ in scholarships and financial assistance beginning 2026, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, but we also recognize that we can't stop there, because it's not just about allocating funds to scholarship. We recognize that as elected representatives, we also have a responsibility to assess and reform systems, Madam Speaker, that have not served our people to its fullest potential. And so we are undertaking a comprehensive review of the scholarship application process to improve awareness, access, efficiency, and communication. The truth is that over the years, we've dropped the ball in this area, Madam Speaker. One of our main aims in the future is to see the establishment of a higher/further education unit by 2027, dedicated to preparing our students for life after secondary education. We must ensure, Madam Speaker, that our students are prepared at every single level to be able to succeed. This administration is also keen on supporting the Anguilla Community College. With a new board of governors in place, they have been charged, Madam Speaker, with helping to reform the organization to enable it to offer new and improved programs, serve the needs of both the public and the private sector, and position the institution as a key leader in tertiary and further education on this island, Madam Speaker. With the support of my new PAS, we are also embarking on a bold initiative to build key partnerships with higher education institutions across the globe, Madam Speaker. As a matter of fact, a number of those negotiations have already started because we intend, Madam Speaker, to enter into a number of MOU agreements with universities regionally and internationally to ensure that our students have additional access to resources, that we are there to support them and guide them through this process, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'll move on to cultural development. It is no secret that I have a strong passion for the cultural and creative industries. This can be evidenced by my master's dissertation in 2015 entitled Governance of the Creative and Cultural Industries. What models of governance do Barbados, Birmingham, and Jamaica employ in organizing their creative and cultural industries, and how can this inform implementation in Anguilla? It is for this reason, Madam Speaker, that I am delighted to announce that we are in the process of passing the Festivals Development Commission legislation, creating a statutory agency dedicated to festivals management. The first of its kind in Anguilla, after decades, Madam Speaker, of lobbying by cultural icons like Mr. John Benjamin, Mr. Abner, Hammer Brooks, Madam Speaker. This historic achievement will see the Commission receiving a combined budget of over $2.3 million in its first year of operation, with a plan for significant development over the next 3 years. Because you see, Madam Speaker, this investment in cultural development is not just about cultural preservation and heritage, though it's a key aspect. It's also about the orange economy and the economic driver that these festivals have the potential to create. Madam Speaker, tourism will always be around. It will always be our bread and butter. But it is very important that we also ensure that we are investing in other avenues to drum up tourism business, to really make our tourism product more exciting, Madam Speaker, and festivals development and management is a key aspect of such, Madam Speaker. I will speak in more detail on this, Madam Speaker, during the budget address. Madam Speaker, I'll move on to community services planning. A strong society is built on strong families and resilient communities. Our social development programs are designed to reach those who need the support most, providing second chances, building capacity, and ensuring that no one is left behind. Through the programs like Potential Unlocked and Social Upskilling, the Ministry and the Community Services Planning Unit will be reaching young people who are at risk, pairing mentorship and skills training, also offering social support to the most vulnerable. I also want to shed a little bit more light on Potential Unlocked, Madam Speaker, because this is a completely new program going into 2026. And I want to put on record my gratitude to the Community Services Planner, Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley, and her team. It is the full rollout of an early intervention initiative supporting primary age students who have emerging behavioral challenges. Once identified, we will provide these children with intervention, support for students and their families, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we will continue to invest in the Family First program, which continues to equip parents and caregivers with the tools necessary to raise their children. Madam Speaker, we're always talking about how important mental health is. But it's also important to ensure that we are investing in mental health. And it is for this reason, Madam Speaker, that I am proud to announce that in 2026, we will recruit both a clinical psychologist and a substance abuse counselor to support schools, families, and justice-involved individuals across our communities. Madam Speaker, a couple of months ago in this honorable house, my colleague on the opposition side talked about the underage drinking and the concerns that exist. And I agreed with him, Madam Speaker. And this continues to be a significant concern, not just for alcohol consumption, Madam Speaker, but there are pills, there are other illicit drugs that are being utilized, and it is critically important that we put the necessary support in place, Madam Speaker, to be able to address some of these concerns. And so I am proud that we will have an additional substance abuse counselor to support that work in 2026. Finally, we are embarking on bold restructuring initiative for our community centers. We are redefining the roles of community centers and their staff to align more closely, Madam Speaker, with the government and the ministry's mandate for community empowerment and outreach. This will aid in the rollout of community services planning units' grassroots programs, which will touch some of our most vulnerable persons, Madam Speaker. Our seniors are an essential part of our lives and our community, and we must ensure that they are safeguarded at all costs. In collaboration with the Chronic Disease Unit, consultations will be undertaken towards implementing standards for residential care homes, ensuring quality care and safety for our early residents. In keeping with this administration's mandate to digitize our systems, we will be securing a child maintenance database and a management information system for social protection. Through the introduction of a new digital system for social protection, families in need will have faster, fairer, and more transparent access to assistance, ensuring that no one falls through the cracks, Madam Speaker. Technology serves to make all our lives easier, and this new process will ensure improved efficiency, accountability, and accuracy of child maintenance collections and case management, Madam Speaker. So we look forward to having those new systems in place in 2026. Under the Gender Affairs Unit, Madam Speaker, I am proud to announce that this administration is committed to strengthening protection, justice, and support for victims and survivors of domestic violence. We have allocated 30,000 to the Gender Affairs Unit to increase its domestic violence programs and initiatives. This funding will address the gaps in sensitization and training that remain in place since the passage of the Domestic Violence Act in 2015. And this is just the beginning, Madam Speaker, because we recognize that you can't just change acts and systems without putting the funding in place and the programs in place to be able to cater to the needs of our people. And speaking of legislation, Madam Speaker, I wish to highlight the historic recent decision of the Executive Council to approve amendments to the Criminal Code. Madam Speaker, I am proud to announce that this administration recently agreed to repeal Section 166 and amend Section 162 to explicitly affirm that marital rape is a criminal offense. This marks a critical step forward in protecting the rights and the dignity and bodily autonomy of all individuals in Anguilla, Madam Speaker. Under probation, construction will continue this year on Zenada Haven Juvenile Rehabilitation Center with an allocation of $9.5 million. This modern facility will provide comprehensive rehabilitation for youth under our care. If anybody has visited the Zenada Haven facility, you know that it is woefully inadequate. It has been in place for a number of years, and it is inadequate for the residents of the facility, but also the caregivers of the facility. We're also developing a centralized database to track cases and monitor progress and improvements in relation to probation monitoring, Madam Speaker. I also wish to put on record that through the House of Assembly, a core responsibility of our members of the House of Assembly has been once again realized. While resources exist for legislation and scrutiny functions, no funding has been provided for constituency work since 2008. Madam Speaker, many will remember that when salaries were being reinstated in the public service, there was also a note to reinstate allowances to members of parliament. I didn't agree with the reinstating of those allowances, Madam Speaker, because I thought the process lacked proper accountability. It was simply going to be an additional tack on to your salary. There was no need for reporting. There was no mechanism to ensure that the additional funding was actually going to be used in constituencies. Now, Madam Speaker, members require a physical office where constituents can meet them, as well as staff to manage casework, research, communication. Reinstating constituency allowances aligns with Goal 3 of the House of Assembly's strategic plan. Because you see, Madam Speaker, over the years, we have instituted strategic plans, we have instituted plans of actions, but we have not ensured that we provided adequate resources to realize these goals, Madam Speaker. And I'm very happy that I was able to advocate heavily for this, Madam Speaker. Constituency allowances are not salary nor discretionary funds. They are specifically earmarked for office spaces and staff. Under the proposed claim-back system, members can claim up to 2,000 EC dollars per month starting in 2026. While this amount does not fully cover the costs, since the full-time staff members' minimum wage is $2,581, it represents a significant step forward and doubles the last allowance paid in 2008. And Madam Speaker, I will continue to lobby for more and additional funding to be utilized effectively, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that brings me to the second portion of my presentation. The budget, Madam Speaker, is not just about the future and what we intend to invest moving forward. It also has implications about the past and the decisions that were made prior to this administration and the impacts of some of those decisions. We are committed to not repeating errors of the past, but rather learning from them. And over the last few months, I've heard quite a bit of rhetoric since the 2025 February snap elections, when the then government called elections that placed them in the opposition benches. We have been accused, Madam Speaker, of not doing enough, moving too slow. And Madam Speaker, I have no issue with criticism. I think criticism helps to keep us grounded. It helps to keep us accountable. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, I welcome the criticism. But much of the rhetoric, I think, Madam Speaker, is actually a distraction. You hear members of the opposition speaking about accountability and transparency, and you wonder to yourself, Madam Speaker, if they are willful or delusional. And there's some of them that I do want to give the benefit of the doubt, Madam Speaker, but I still can't. Because they now stand on the other side telling us what we should do. So I take the opportunity to remind the public of a few key sets of decisions that were undertaken by the previous administration that are still affecting us today. Because, Madam Speaker, I think repetition is critically important. And I'll start with the Lansam Bowl Cultural Center. Madam Speaker, upon coming to office, we were furnished with an MOU agreement. By the way, up to that point, this MOU agreement was not seen by the PS of Maiku or the PS of Social Development, my PS. So we would have seen this around the same time, Madam Speaker. An MOU agreement that committed the government of Anguilla to any overruns over $5 million US. Madam Speaker, when we came into office, a little over $6 million US was already spent on the Lansing Bowl Cultural Center, Madam Speaker. Which means then, Madam Speaker, that the government of Anguilla owes the funder $1 million US, 2.6 million EC dollars, Madam Speaker. Monies that could be going to the electricity credits that the members of the opposition continue to talk about. The current government of Anguilla has to repay that money back to the funder. When that previous administration has always said on record, both on radio and in this House of Assembly, that the Lansing Bowl Cultural Center was purely a gift. At no point in time did any member of the former APM administration say that they signed an MOU agreement that committed the government of Anguilla to anything over $5 million, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that agreement would have been put together by the former Premier and the Honorable Member for Island Harbour, his permanent secretary at the time, and the AG, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, imagine my surprise when I'm furnished with a letter from the Comptroller of Inland Revenue indicating that it is illegal for government to commit to give back funding via the GST mechanism, Madam Speaker. Furnished to my email, Madam Speaker, telling me that it is illegal.
Madam Speaker, point of order. The member is incorrect and misleading. This would have gone through the Attorney General's chambers and would have been agreed to.
Wait, which part? She talked about a letter, and then she went on to talk about
She
which
talked
part?
about that there was a letter from IRD saying that it was illegal for monies to be committed through the GST that was owed by the developer, that would be owed, that they can claim back on that.
Member, are you disputing that there was a letter, or what is the point of order in relation to that? There was no letter, or that there was a letter?
I won't dispute that there was a letter. I'll dispute that it was illegal.
But that's not an issue. What she's referring to is a communication that she's received. So the point of order is whether it exists or doesn't exist.
But Madam Speaker, what she's implying is that it was illegal, that the way the MOU was done.
No, Honorable Member, what I heard the member say, and then she can raise to correct me if I heard it, but what I heard her say is that to her surprise, and I promise you we'll have our transcript soon, to her surprise, on coming to office, she was delivered a letter from IRD, and therein contained the information that there was. So there's no issue as to whether that's true or not. She's recounting what she received. Am I correct in my understanding?
Yes, you absolutely are, Madam Speaker.
Proceed.
Madam Speaker, the Comptroller of Inland Revenue indicated that there was no mechanism in the GST legislation to be able to claim back against what was promised in the MOU agreement, Madam Speaker. And my interpretation of that is that what was done was illegal, Madam Speaker, because there's nothing in the legislation that allows that to happen. I was furnished with that information, Madam Speaker, and I have the records available for it. We have since been told, Madam Speaker, by other members of the public service that cannot happen, that could not have been promised. And I noticed that the member from Island Harbour said it went through the Attorney General's chambers. But I think perhaps maybe the member was furnished with poor advice from whoever would have been advising him at the time, Madam Speaker. But I will let that rest there for the time being. But these are the facts, Madam Speaker, and the records, and I have all the letters readily available to be furnished, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker,
Honourable
again,
Member.
point of order. The member is imputing improper motive, Madam Speaker. She is implying that she, who is a non-lawyer, can interpret things, whether they're illegal or not, when the Attorney General himself,
Who is she interpreting? Who is she imputing improper motive to?
to the Attorney General at the time and to us.
The
to
Attorney
me.
General is present. He hasn't taken a point of order. Is it that you're suggesting that she's making an imputing improper motive to you as a then Premier?
She did point to me as member for Island Harbor, who was the Premier and who would have been responsible for the MOU, Madam Speaker. She states, the member states that her interpretation is
Her
that it's
interpretation,
illegal. Correct. She is not a lawyer, Madam Speaker. The Attorney General himself, the Honorable Dwight Horsford, would have given an opinion. We as government have to accept the opinion of the Attorney General or the Attorney General's chambers. So how could it be illegal if that was given as the decision at the time, Madam Speaker?
And I do take your point, Honourable Member, but however, a member is entitled to their interpretation from a set of facts that are presented to them. You have all right to disagree with it and can advance what information you relied on. You haven't spoken as yet, so I'm pretty sure you can address that, but I don't see it as a valid point of order. I believe the member is allowed to give her interpretation, whether she's a lawyer or not. I think both sides give lots of interpretations without the necessary expertise. We have financial expertise when they're not, so I don't think that would be proper. Proceed, member.
Thank you very
It
much.
always applies on both sides, Honourable Leader. You know that.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I hope I get my time back. And Madam Speaker, I have never given the general public the impression that I am a lawyer. As a matter of fact, I am very quick to say that I am not a lawyer. And that's why I oftentimes refer to documentation that I am provided with, Madam Speaker. However, Madam Speaker, this information and documentation came from the Comptroller of Inland Revenue. I would imagine that the Comptroller of Inland Revenue is very familiar with the GST legislation that existed at that time and would be comfortable putting in writing what he did based on his knowledge of the GST legislation, Madam Speaker, not me. And I wasn't imputing improper motive, Madam Speaker. The document that I received from Inland Revenue said that there was no mechanism in the legislation to allow for that. And so the honorable member would have indicated, Madam Speaker, that he has no choice but to take essentially the information from the AG's chambers. Well, Madam Speaker, I beg to differ. Because if I believe that the information being rendered to me by the AG's chambers is not fit and proper, I'm going to seek out an additional opinion to ensure that the decisions I make and commit the government of Anguilla to are legal, Madam Speaker. And I dare say, if further consultation had been taken with additional public servants, Madam Speaker, outside of that small group of individuals, perhaps one of those public servants could have better advised both the AG and the honorable member from Island Harbor, since they are dealing with the legislation on a daily basis, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is nothing that I am making up. This is all facts that can be easily verified. In addition to that, in relation to the Lansing Bowl Cultural Center, Madam Speaker, lessons learned. This is a report that came from the Ministry of Maiku. The government of Anguilla should establish procedures regarding how to administer contracts of projects which are supported by grant funding. The government of Anguilla should ensure that all projects supported by grant funding conform to the current procurement rules and legislation used for projects that are funded by the government. This will ensure a fair and transparent system is used to select contractors for the projects. It further says, Madam Speaker, the government of Anguilla should ensure that all projects being constructed goes through the appropriate approval process, such as obtaining permits for demolition, planning approval, and building, Madam Speaker. Not my words, Madam Speaker. The reports of public servants who all the members formally praised. So these are the same public servants that they formally praised, Madam Speaker. So I have no reason to question all that the same public servants are furnishing me with, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it further says, at times the Honorable Minister of Maiku, and that would be the now Honorable Member for Road South. At times, the Honorable Minister for Maiku appeared to be enabling the actions of GT Construction against the recommendations of staff of the project team and Maiku. This occurrence forced a special meeting to be convened between the Minister of Maiku and the project team, which was mediated by the Deputy Governor to chart a way forward for the project. Furthermore, and I want to repeat this, Madam Speaker, furthermore, a clear conflict existed for the Minister of Maiku, whereby a close relative was awarded as contractor for one of the buildings. And I repeat that, Madam, not my words, Madam Speaker, please. These are the words of the technocrats, Madam Speaker. Furthermore, a clear conflict existed for the Minister of Maiku, whereby a close relative was awarded as contractor for one of the buildings, Madam Speaker. This issue was never spoken of or dealt with during the execution of that product, Madam Speaker. So when we want to talk about transparency and accountability, and we want to get on radio every Monday and propose to be upstanding citizens of the loyal opposition and asking for account of the people's funds, Madam Speaker, we must remember that records matter. And I am no longer on the opposition benches, Madam Speaker, where I can't be furnished with detailed information that government has. I am now a member of government and I have access to this information, and I will furnish the public with this information, Madam Speaker. I'll move on. The Anguilla Tourist Board's overspending and lack of accountability. Madam Speaker, imagine our surprise when a few months into office, the Anguilla Tourist Board's board and lead member of the operations team indicated that they were in trouble. They had spent all of the money allotted to them for the year because the former director of tourism indicated to them that they could spend all the funds because the former minister, again, the member for Road South, had promised a supplementary budget. This was the information that the accountant provided, Madam Speaker, to the now director and the board. This information was reconfirmed in a meeting with cabinet, Madam Speaker. So imagine, through government's budgetary process, the Anguilla Tourist Board is allotted about 8 million EC dollars. But the former director would have told the accounting team, please work with a budget of $12 million instead of 8 million, because the minister has promised a supplementary budget. Well, Madam Speaker, I can tell you that that is not how this process is supposed to work. You are supposed to work within the confines of your budget. In the event that there are cost overruns or there are major projects during the year that you want to take advantage of, then you should be coming back, Madam Speaker, to the government of Anguilla to ask for supplementary support, to make a case for additional support, not coming into the year, spending up all your monies, to then come to the government of Anguilla to bail you out because a minister has allegedly promised you a $12 million budget, Madam Speaker, that has never been reflected in any budget. But I go further, Madam Speaker, because it's important to delve a little bit deeper, Madam Speaker, in relation to the Anguilla Tourist Board. Because when the Anguilla Tourist Board came to us and said they needed additional funds to be able to continue all the great work that they want to do, the Honorable Premier said, and rightfully so, well, I need an account of where these funds have been spent. And so the operations team at the Anguilla Tourist Board was then tasked with creating a report that detailed how spending would go, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to share with the general public some of the details of this alarming report. Over the 5-year period from 2020 to 2024, the Anguilla Tourist Board recorded a growing trend of meals and entertainment expenditure totaling over 300,000 US dollars. That is over 800,000 EC dollars, Madam Speaker. Funds that could have definitely gone towards the electricity credits that the loyal opposition continues to speak about. While certain expenditures are in line with typical board governance and staff appreciation practices, numerous patterns point to a lack of spending discipline, insufficient policy controls, and a blurred line between public service and personal gratification. Let me repeat that again, Madam Speaker. I'm reading from a report. I didn't make this report up. I didn't create this report. Insufficient policy controls and blurred lines between While certain expenditures are in line with typical board governance and staff appreciation, numerous patterns point to a lack of spending discipline, insufficient policy controls, and blurred lines between the public service and personal gratification. This report synthesizes all the years and provides analysis and identifies red flags and recommends governance indicators. Madam Speaker, in 2022, 19,000 EC dollars was spent on a Christmas dinner. Frequent personalized birthday spending, vague C. Stacy charges. And I want to put this into perspective. Whenever you hear me reference C. Stacy, it means that there's no supporting documentation, which is a critical part of any audit trail. But instead of having an invoice or supporting documentation, all it has attached is a memo that says, see Stacy. Well, we can't see Stacy because Stacy is no longer there. And that is why, Madam Speaker, reporting and auditing documentation is so important, because long after we leave institutions, they are there. They are there to protect us, and they are there to protect those who remain in the organization. In 2023, $98,000 was spent, Madam Speaker, in the same budgetary head. Executive discretion spending, off-island trips, luxury venues, repeated gift purchases, all these are in the report, Madam Speaker. In 2024, Madam Speaker, 112,000 EC dollars was spent in that head. Two major events, $50,000, Madam Speaker. Recurring birthday spending, vague transaction justifications. And I want to put things into perspective, Madam Speaker, because in 2020, in the same head, in total, we spent 10,000 EC dollars in the entire year. And you jump to 2024, and you have spent $112,000, Madam Speaker, in the same head. You don't have way more staff. As a matter of fact, in some cases, you had less staff in some times. But yet you have this overspending, Madam Speaker. And they get further into the specifics. In 2022, December, 19,000 EC dollars spent on Christmas dinner for staff. In 2024, the chairman's farewell was 25,000+ EC dollars, Madam Speaker. Imagine you are having a farewell for a chairman of a board and you are spending over $25,000. Madam Speaker, this money could be spent on the electricity credits that the loyal opposition keeps referring to. Because I'll further get to this further down, Madam Speaker. The concern, it says, over 40% of annual M&E in some years went towards holiday functions or farewell parties, signaling unsustainable and reputationally risky practices. Honorable member, you're disturbing my presentation. I know it's unsettling, but you are loud. It further says, Madam Speaker, executive and personalized discretionary spending. It says C. Stacy entries appear in 2022, 2023, and 2024. And I will say to you, Madam Speaker, I can put my neck on the block that you will not see any C. Stacy entries prior to April 2022, when I resigned from the Anguilla Tourist Board. All of these C. Stacy entries can only appear after April of 2022. Madam Speaker, totaling thousands of dollars. Examples include Aurora Resort, Village Bakehouse, Eyes Wide Shut tickets, and the concern, Madam Speaker, lack of transparency, audibility, and business justification undermines financial governance. Madam Speaker, this is a report I'm reading from, a report that has been verified by the accountant who met with Cabinet when the report was being presented, Madam Speaker. Weak internal controls and documentation. Descriptions such as lunch with CMO, C. Stacy, and walking through lunch appear often without names, justification, or purpose. Recurring personal gifts to directors, staff, and retirees without documentation or policy alignment. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, there were a number of draft policies left in 2022. To date, the board has told us when they met with Cabinet that those policies still remain in draft. Imagine, Madam Speaker, I would have drafted those policies to help with internal controls and accountability. So there was no need for anybody to come in and draft them. The policies are already there drafted, yet they remained in draft since 2022, 2023, 2024, Madam Speaker. And I'll wrap up on the Anguilla Tourist Board because I have a few more. Conclusion. The Anguilla Tourist Board meals and entertainment expenditure over 2020 to 2024 reveals increasing discretionary spending, poor documentation, and absence of internal controls. While team morale and stakeholder relations are important, which I agree, the current approach raises compliance, reputational, and fiduciary concerns. Immediate policy adoption, strict oversight, and a shift towards transparency are essential to ensure that public funds are spent ethically. So you know what, Madam Speaker? In order for us not to have the Anguilla Tourist Board empty-handed and not without the ability to represent the destination, our Honorable Premier had to then take funding, Madam Speaker, from other areas of underspend in our budget to be able to transfer to the Anguilla Tourist Board, Madam Speaker. So when you hear the honorable members talking about the electricity credits and what they should do, what they're not telling you is that the decisions made under their watch, Madam Speaker, they have implications. And the Honorable Premier cannot just spend willy-nilly, Madam Speaker. The Honorable Premier has to consider all the different elements, all the different implications, Madam Speaker, and then make decisions that are in the greater interest of the people. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, last year we had a budget of overseas travel of over 3 million EC dollars, Madam Speaker. To date, Madam Speaker, we have spent over 7 million EC dollars in overseas travel. Not overseas travel, Madam Speaker, overseas medical treatment. My apologies. And Madam Speaker, that is because this government is a people-centered and people-focused administration, Madam Speaker. And we believe that no one should be left behind, Madam Speaker. It doesn't matter if your family doesn't have, if you are without. If we are in a position to stand in the gap for you, this administration will stand in the gap for you, Madam Speaker. So yes, there may be persons who are upset that they haven't received electricity credits, but I know that there are many grateful families, Madam Speaker, who are happy when this administration stood in the gap for their loved one and gave them a fighting chance, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I make no apologies for us giving Anguillians a fighting chance, because every single person deserves a chance at life, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and this aspect of the Anguilla Tourist Board's funding, before I move on, is just one small aspect. There are other major areas, Madam Speaker, that I don't have the time to ventilate currently. But I'd like to move on, Madam Speaker, to the donor-funded basketball court that was not fit for purpose, Madam Speaker. This project started way before Lansing Bowl Cultural Center. And as soon as Lansing Bowl Cultural Center started, Madam Speaker, the work on that project ceased. So when you hear them talking about, oh, it's 2025, we've been in for 10 months and no work has been done, Madam Speaker, the project started long before we came to office. The project started long before Lansing Bowl Cultural Center, and yet the project was not finished. So we should be asking the question to the honorable member for Road South about what happened to the funds. Why did the project stop? Madam Speaker, we didn't stop the project. We met a project that had already stopped. The member also asked questions, Madam Speaker, in relation to whether the funding was done or not. But I can't answer whether the funding was done or not, Madam Speaker. You know why? Because there's no proper government accounting trail that you can audit. And you know why that is the case, Madam Speaker? Because just like the Lansing Bowl Cultural Center, donor funding was given straight to the contractor. Michael Sports, no one has a copy of the contract between the donor and the contractor. We don't know what the terms of reference are, Madam Speaker. We can't determine value for money. I hear people asking all the time, when are you going to do a forensic audit on Lansing Bowl Cultural Center? When are you going to do a forensic audit on the Blowing Point basketball court? But how can you do an audit, Madam Speaker, when no monies were deposited to the government of Anguilla's account? One, you have no sight of the contract, Madam Speaker, so you can't determine what were the performance indicators, whether they were met, whether there was legitimate overspend or underspend. We don't know. But you see, Madam Speaker, that is part of the problem when you don't go through open and fair, transparent processes. So when I hear the hypocrisy from the members of the loyal opposition, it is laughable, except it is not funny. Because now this administration is part of the cleanup crew. And they would have coined themselves, Madam Speaker, as the Do Things crew, which is great, no problem. But we are the Do Things Right crew, Madam Speaker. And we are going to get it right the first time. Madam Speaker, I move on to returning the compulsory acquired lands at the Blowing Point Ferry Terminal. And I've gotten so many complaints. Oh, you guys need to do something about the traffic at the ferry terminal. The spacing is too tight. We don't know what's going on. Madam Speaker, there was a time when perpetrators ran right up to the door of the ferry terminal and was able to attack someone, Madam Speaker. God bless that the person was not killed, Madam Speaker. A guest was nicked on their foot, Madam Speaker, traumatized. Someone who had been coming here for years, traumatized, Madam Speaker. Why? Because we don't have the necessary lands to properly, Madam Speaker, properly secure our port. Had that port been an airport, it could not operate. Because based on the regulations, Madam Speaker, we could not have persons in such close proximity to a port. But Madam Speaker, we are rushing to say that we are doing things. Imagine coming into office. The lands are already compulsory acquired, and you decide to return those lands back. And there was something that was mentioned earlier. I think the honorable member might have made an error when he said they were already paid for. They weren't already paid for, Madam Speaker, but they were already compulsory acquired. So all you had to do now was go through the process of negotiating the price for those lands and move forward. Instead, you decided, let me give these lands back because there's no need for lands to improve traffic flow or security at the Blowing Point Ferry Terminal. So you return them. And now, government has to go back through the process of trying to acquire said lands. What sort of foresight is that, Madam Speaker? We're talking about visionary leadership and all of these things. You didn't have to go through the process of compulsory acquisition. The dedicated public servants had already gone through that process with the necessary persons. You just had to negotiate, giving persons fair compensation for their property, Madam Speaker, so that we could utilize the desperately needed funds, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I hope you realize there's a consistent trend here, Madam Speaker, because who again is at the center of this? The Honorable Member for Road South, at the center of this. The person who constantly touts on radio, Madam Speaker, about accountability, fairness, and transparency, Madam Speaker, trying to distract persons from the facts by constantly repeating that I went on a cruise, Madam Speaker, in August, constantly repeating it, Madam Speaker, as a distraction. Madam Speaker, I didn't use government's funds to go on vacation. I used my personal funds. The member would have used his personal funds to build his house and go off-grid solar, and I've used mine differently. We are all being compensated for the work that we do, Madam Speaker. So I don't see why this should have been a topic constantly being ventilated in the public domain when the same honorable member should be able to account for all of these things that he's at the center of, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'll move on further. There was a huge announcement by the honorable member for Island Harbor about free dialysis, Madam Speaker. When we came into office, Madam Speaker, we continue to get all sorts of reports from dialysis patients. We are still being charged. We are still giving bills. I mean, it was a very frustrating period for us, Madam Speaker, because we couldn't understand why were people constantly being charged. Come to find out, Madam Speaker, no policy paper had gone to Executive Council outlining that you were giving free dialysis, Madam Speaker. And essentially, we were being told this could not be offered unless Executive Council had approved this. So then, we had to then go through the process of getting a policy paper done to get it through Executive Council. And while, Madam Speaker, we would have wanted to legislate this, there was very little time. We needed to be able to give people immediate relief. So again, moving forward, these are things that we will have to enshrine in legislation: senior shield, junior shield, and free dialysis care, Madam Speaker. Again, making these general promises to the public, but not ensuring that the requisite work is being done to ensure that translates into that delivery, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to report that we were able to approve this in Executive Council a few weeks ago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, sending sixth form over to the Anguilla Community College without a well-planned transition strategy or the requisite budget to facilitate such crucial transition, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, how do you send over a whole grouping of students with just one new position, a coordinator? No additional funding for additional teacher support, none of those things, Madam Speaker. So who then now has to step in and try to remedy some of the challenges that both students and parents continue to face in relation to that? The cleanup crew, Madam Speaker. The do things right crew. But that's okay, Madam Speaker. I love a challenge, and I will continue to work on the challenges day in, day out, until we get them right, Madam Speaker. Because if it is one thing I do is when I commit myself to adjusting something and writing something, I do it, Madam Speaker. That's why, Madam Speaker, upon coming into office, I could find the funding to pay the junior Calypsonians, Madam Speaker, and the troops, because those were promises that I made, Madam Speaker. And when you make promises, you keep them. Madam Speaker, you hear all this rhetoric out in the public domain, but one thing the loyal opposition cannot say is that we made a specific promise and we have broken that specific promise. We promised GST relief, Madam Speaker, and we outlined specifically the GST areas that we would suggest. We didn't just give a blanket statement. We outlined the 4 areas in the GST structure and how we would adjust them. And we did exactly that, Madam Speaker. We adjusted those areas, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I went on the rostrum in Valley North and I promised that we would find the funding to compensate the troops and the junior Calypsonians, that is what we did when we came into office, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we never promised $500 ANGLEC credits, never once. We have always said that we understand that people are overwhelmed and they need support and they need some level of relief. So we accept when this administration was giving their $500 credits, Madam Speaker, but we have always maintained that we don't need $500 credits, Madam Speaker. We need lower cost of electricity that is sustainable, Madam Speaker. Our economy depends on it. Our supermarkets depend on it, Madam Speaker. Lower energy costs will benefit every single member of this country, Madam Speaker. It doesn't matter who you are or where you go. And that is why we are steadfast, Madam Speaker, in our path to get to renewable energy integration. Imagine the member coming here today saying, I think we need to chart a different course. Continue to keep the electricity bills high and focus on putting the electricity underground. I'm not disputing that we should look at putting electricity underground, Madam Speaker. But to say that you should abandon renewable energy for the other, I think that is absolutely outrageous. And Madam Speaker, the records are there. The member is on record saying he thinks we should not worry with renewable energy anymore and put it underground. But Madam Speaker, putting it underground does not bring the cost of electricity down. We need to give people long-term sustainable relief. These quick fixes, let me give you a $500 here and let me wait 3-4 months, give you another $500. No, you need consistent lower level electricity. So when the members of the opposition get on radio and say, oh, they're not doing this for you and they're not doing that for you, we never promised those things, Madam Speaker. When we were on the platform, we were very, very, very careful about the things we promised and the commitments we made, Madam Speaker, because we were aware of some of the decisions that they were making at the time, Madam Speaker. So I want to continue to put on record, Madam Speaker, that this administration is focused on delivering the promises that we made and not the short-term quick fixes. Madam Speaker, we are about to open a terminal building, Madam Speaker, that will be glassy, beautiful and shining and still way smaller than it needs to be, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, these are not my words, These are the words from the stakeholders who are responsible for utilizing those spaces, not me. Because I've been very quiet in the last 9 months about that airport infrastructure, Madam Speaker. Because the narrative was, I'd like to request an additional 15 minutes. Madam Speaker, it seems like you have a new speaker, Deputy Speaker. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. And Madam Speaker, I was not given the opportunity in this honorable house last year, Madam Speaker, to be able to just give my personal opinion, Madam Speaker, on where I felt the direction should have gone in relation to the airport extension, Madam Speaker. I always believed that the focus should have been on the runway extension first, Madam Speaker, and the building after. And I said this, Madam Speaker, not just because I wanted to criticize the administration, but I said this because as someone who has sat in meetings with airlines, who has traveled to routes on multiple occasions, Madam Speaker, who has done certifications in route development training, Madam Speaker, I know that one of the first questions that we are always asked about is the length of the runway. Another question we're always asked about, Madam Speaker, is the quality of our healthcare facilities, Madam Speaker. I've never, ever been in a room where I've been asked about the terminal building, Madam Speaker. Never once. Never once. I have seen, and you can see after Hurricane Irma, long before St. Martin's building was up and operational, the flights were coming and going, Madam Speaker. And you know why? Because the runway length was adequate and was no issue, Madam Speaker. And I've always maintained that airport development is important, but we need to do two things. Seek a creative way so that government doesn't bear that cost themselves. And two, start with the runway. I still believe in that, Madam Speaker. And I encourage the general Anguillan public and the stakeholders who have to utilize the airport to do the best you can. Continue to remain steadfast in your work, whether you believe the facilities are too small, they're inadequate, because I hear the complaints, Madam Speaker. These are not things that we are making up, Madam Speaker. They exist and they're there. And I will tell you, this administration is committed, Madam Speaker, to seeing that runway extension through. It is critically important. And I heard the Honorable Member for Road South Road North, talk about, Madam Speaker, the deficit, Madam Speaker, that is being projected. And I want to say something, Madam Speaker. I want to get the information, because you know, Madam Speaker, I like to quote from the information. Madam Speaker, the member would have talked about the deficit. But Madam Speaker, government is continuous. And it's important that we do a couple of things. One, we carry on with projects that are critical to our economy. The extension of the runway is one of those projects, and we have always, as an administration, maintained that that is critical. It makes no sense, Madam Speaker, for us to stop the runway extension because you've already front-loaded so much money in a terminal building. You have to see this project through to start to gain some sort of value for money, some sort of return on your investment. So we must push forward in the acquisition of the lands, Madam Speaker, which is millions of dollars, Madam Speaker. We're not going to get the lands free, Madam Speaker. When we came into office, not 1 acre of land, Madam Speaker, was acquired in relation to that airport project, Madam Speaker. And we all know how lands, families and lands operate in this country, Madam Speaker. So we have gone through the process of going through the acquisition. And Madam Speaker, we have actually put a team in place very recently to help to support that acquisition because we know the importance of this to the country and the economy. There are a number of other projects, Madam Speaker, that have to continue because government is continuous. Just like in 2020, when the APM administration came in, they had to continue with the South Hill Clinic. They had to continue with the Valley Polyclinic. They had to continue with Albina Lake Hodge Comprehensive School. They had to continue with the extensions on Road Primary School, East End School. All of them had to continue, Madam Speaker. So when I hear people talking about, oh, this government has done the most infrastructure projects in the history and the most roads, how? I say maybe those persons weren't around prior to 2010 when the Honorable Mr. Kenneth Harrigan was paving roads left, right, and center. But it seems like our people have been conditioned to believe that only in the last 5 years roads have been built, Madam Speaker. And it is important to put these things on record. Madam Speaker, I shift to something that goes back further than the APM administration. This goes back to the AUM administration, Madam Speaker. And this has again to do with the Honorable Member from Road South. He continues to be a figure at the center of contention, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, during the period 2010 to 2015, Madam Speaker, we had a festivals office, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we were way ahead of some Caribbean islands. As a matter of fact, I remember keenly, there were particular Caribbean islands that were reaching out for information on the model and, and how it was set up and the parameters, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that office was made redundant during the period when the member for Road South served as the parliamentary secretary responsible for tourism. That institution was made redundant. And that is why today, Madam Speaker, it feels like we are starting over brand new. The member would have indicated, Madam Speaker, that there were issues within the organization. There was a lack of accountability and all of this. So, Madam Speaker, you solve lack of accountability by making an entire office redundant? Is it that you don't support the mandate of festivals development? Is it that you didn't understand the importance of it to the creative economy? Madam Speaker, is it that you didn't understand the importance of it to the tourism economy? Because let me tell you, ask St. Kitts about the money they bring in for their festival. Ask St. Lucia about the money that they bring in for their jazz festival, Madam Speaker. Even ask Nevis about the growing mango festival, Madam Speaker, just there across the waters, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, so fast forward, Madam Speaker, close to, I would say, a good 10, 15 years later, we now will be implementing a festivals commission, Madam Speaker. Through a statutory body, Madam Speaker, we will have the necessary controls and protocols in place, Madam Speaker. And I must put on record, after the redundancy that occurred, Madam Speaker, the government of Anguilla was taken to court, sued by some of the same people that we made redundant and fired, and handsomely rewarded because the court believed that they were wrongfully dismissed, Madam Speaker. And who do you think had to cover that bill, Madam Speaker? The people of Anguilla, Madam Speaker. The people of Anguilla. So when I hear people talking about transparency and accountability and use of government's funds, and so many decisions that they have made, Madam Speaker, currently now and in the past. Because remember, Madam Speaker, the general public shouldn't forget that I read out a memo written by a former governor in relation to an MOU agreement that was negotiated among the Honorable Member for Road South and his dad and what would have occurred. And I'll bring that back to the House of Assembly because I think repetition is important, Madam Speaker. Because when we talk about records and we like to attack people personally, Madam Speaker, we need to remember that we also have records, Madam Speaker. And we are no longer on the opposition side. So I've said all of this to say, Madam Speaker, that the decisions that were made in the past have implications for us now and this budgetary process, Madam Speaker. So we may be appearing to be moving a bit slow, Madam Speaker, but we are going to do things right. And I spoke, Madam Speaker.
2 minutes, member. 2 minutes.
And I will close on this. I spoke, Madam Speaker.
I apologize. The clock says 5 minutes. 5 minutes, but you should
Thank you,
wrap up.
Clerk. Madam Speaker, I thank you for that. And I'll close on one final point, Madam Speaker, in relation to the Lansing Bowl Cultural Center. Because the member for Road North indicated that we are now going to invest funds in it. Madam Speaker, government is continuous. What do they expect us to do? The original plan for the Lansing Bowl Cultural Center included DYC offices, taking DYC out of rent and putting them into that space, Madam Speaker. It's unfortunate that the 16 million EC dollars was not enough to completely finish the structure, Madam Speaker. Quite unfortunate. But that being said, the need for them to be in proper office accommodation still remains. So this administration, as a responsible administration, we have to finish the project, Madam Speaker. But we're not going back to the donor for additional funding, Madam Speaker, to keep us on the hook for additional money. We are taking government's funds to complete the project, and we are going through the procurement process. And so I just like to tell the contractors out there, a number of these are out for procurement. I encourage you to bid so that we can have a good pool of contractors to complete this project. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members of this honorable house for the opportunity to present here today. I want to thank the people of District 3 for the opportunity to serve them with grace and with distinction, Madam Speaker. And I will continue to do so, Madam Speaker, because I believe that proper representation is important and that we must work above and beyond to right the wrongs that exist, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank you once again for the opportunity, and that is the end of my budgetary presentation. Thank you.